All right, everybody. It's that time again. It's Franchise or Bust, and we are super excited to bring you a wealth of information today from the fine legal minds over at Baker Donelson, who are going to help us understand the most important things and maybe some things you haven't thought about before as it relates to your legal needs and the things that are going to help you be most successful as a franchisor or franchisee in the space that you're in. So, as always, Trevor's here. Katie is with us. And we also have with us Laura McDonald and Joel. Joel Buckberg from Baker Donelson. Joel has been around the block. He's got years of experience, and Laura's also gaining years of experience as well, working with the team. So, Laura, Joel, nice to have you all. How you doing?
Trevor, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to join you and Katie this morning and talk about our favorite subject, franchising. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and both in-house and as private counsel. And there's a lot of information and a lot of moving parts in franchising that folks need to be aware of.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I am excited to talk to you about this topic. We would love to give you a little information of what's going on and what we see coming down the pike for 2024 in franchise world.
Fantastic. Yeah. And something that gets brought up very often when we're speaking to franchisors and Z's alike is trying to understand some of the most important fundamentals as it relates to what exactly they're getting into. I mean, when you buy into a franchise brand or you start as a franchisor, it's a little bit different than just starting your own business and providing a service. You have to set up the layers and the structure whereby you've got essentially fellow business owners that are, going out and promoting your vision and your product, but they have to do it under certain guidelines and certain rules. So they're not truly independents, but they kind of are. So maybe if you could just kind of start us off in that world a little bit and the thought process of how you are originally kind of setting up a franchise brand so that the structure, the understanding of between the franchisor, the franchisee, the agreements, the FDD, all these things get set up at the beginning. That's going to help you scale, succeed in a business that's not just necessarily, hey, I thought of something, I'm going to do it on my own.
Trevor, thanks. There's a lot to unpack there, but let me see if I can parse that a little bit. So, the IFA is fond of saying with a franchise, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself. And so the theory is that with a franchise, you're buying a spot that is up the learning curve for the business that you are going to engage in. And so you're not starting from scratch. You're not putting it all together and being, the very basic entrepreneurship of a pure startup, but you're taking advantage of other people's experience, other people's mistakes, and other people's learnings, and paying a price for that. But in theory, the word system isn't really an acronym that stands for save yourself time, energy, and money. And so the key is the system well thought out? Is it put together? Is it likely to be supportive of your efforts? There's an old anecdote in franchising about how people copied one major QSR chain's site decisions, and they would buy land for their QSR right across the street. What they didn't really understand was that original site selection was based on traffic patterns at the time of day where that customer is most likely to want that product. And so it's that sort of detail that becomes important in understanding what you're buying with a franchise. So back in the mid 70s, first the states and then the federal government got involved in regulating franchising by creating this disclosure document. And the theory is It's not like buying a share of stock or a bond or anything else that's usually called a security, because instead of the success due to other people's efforts, the success is due to your own efforts. And there was a gap in the regulatory structure. And so the franchise disclosure document, which was then called the Uniform Franchise Offering Circular, which people didn't really like to say when it got to acronym level, was created so that people who would want to buy a franchise would make an informed decision. And it has, it is maybe one of the most boring documents on the planet to read. And we write it for a living, and we acknowledge that. And so, but it follows a prescribed format. It allows for comparison between franchisors. So, for example, in item 6, your ongoing fees, you can pull out those tables, lay them side by side, and you'll know exactly, what franchise A is going to charge, what B is going to charge, what C is going to charge, and you can compare that. And so it's designed to facilitate this shopping exercise by prospective franchisees. And Laura is relatively new to franchising, but as she stepped into it, I'd be curious to hear her perspective on what it was like to try and understand what this is all about.
Thank you. It's the interesting part to me is the 23 items in the FDD that the Federal Trade Commission prescribes as what they think is important. The FTC is supposed to update the franchise rule every 10 years, but it has not been updated since 2008. So one of the topics that is hot in our circle is there has been an announcement that the franchise rule will be updated now 15, 16 years later. Excuse me. And so the FTC is taking a look at, I hope they're taking a look at what are these the most important things in 2024. Do we really need a 300-page document? As Joel said, if you have trouble sleeping, we can provide some FDDs for you. But the items that are prescribed by the FTC, are uniform. It does offer good mechanism for comparing if you're looking at a particular industry or to purchase as a franchise or become a franchisee. But I think the interesting thing, as Joel says, is we make entrepreneurs' dreams come true. So it is exciting to see businesses develop, and there's so many opportunities that I was so unaware that you can franchise. Services, businesses. It's not just restaurants, right? There's so many opportunities. If you have an interest, there's a franchise for it.
Yeah, for sure. How do you guys help, potential franchisees or, the franchisors as well, sort of navigate? You mentioned, things in 2024 and there maybe hasn't been a whole lot of updates for a while, like maybe there should have been. But there's, just the ever changing landscape of business. I mean, things from minimum wage to, ideas on joint employment. I mean, just all these avenues that are kind of around. How do they impact franchising? And then how do you guys advise on the legal side? Hey, hey, franchisor, this is what's coming down the pipe. Here's some language you need in your FDD. Or hey, franchisee, you understand what what the language in the FDD is, but don't forget about these things also, just as you start your business. What kind of advice and discussions around those points do you all have?
Yeah, Trevor, that's a great question. So franchising is not episodic. It's not transactional in the sense that you walk into a location or you engage with a merchant and complete a transaction and that's it. Maybe there's a warranty. You're entering into a long-term financial relationship that requires substantial investment on your part as the franchisee, and the franchisor is committing its resources to support you in your location or your assigned territory for a long period of time. These typically run 5, 10, 20 years in some cases, which is coincident with The financing that's typically offered, franchises with higher capital investments typically have longer terms because their financing runs a longer course, and franchises with lower capital investment typically have shorter terms because they have a faster payback, and conditions in that market probably change faster than in the higher capex franchises. So that's important to keep in mind. And when we're drafting and advising franchisors and franchisees on this long-term relationship, you have to plan for change. You have to think. So technology is a great example. You can never have a fixed fee for technology because technology costs go up, they go down, they become commoditized, and so you have to anticipate what's the potential for change. So, 20 years ago, nobody knew what the internet was. It was, Al Gore's dream. And so many agreements really didn't anticipate that. And as a result, they were behind the curve. And so one thing we've learned is the pace of change is quickening. And the plan for changes both in the regulatory environment and the macroeconomic environment and within the industry is such that if you're a franchisee and you have a great location, you can't assume that that's going to be a great location 5 years from now. And so the key really is for both sides is to build in flexibility. So that you can anticipate that conditions will change, your business model may have to change with it. And delivery is a great example. I mean, nobody delivered 15 years ago. Now everybody delivers either directly or indirectly. And so because the world is changing so quickly, the key is to say we need to create a flexible platform that's going to work today, work in 5 years, and work in 10 years, so that we get in a situation where the investment return is going to be maximized over time. So,
I
Laura.
was going to say we can sort of overlap the regulatory changes in the environment. As Joel said, I've only done this a couple of years, and it's kind of exciting to come in and see a lot of activity, a flurry of activity. The FTC has talked about or has a notice of proposed rulemaking on non-competes in the employment context. The NLRB has changed the joint employer rule, and we're looking at consumer privacy where 5 states have active privacy laws on the books, and I believe 8 have the new laws that are coming down in the next 1 to 2 years that will become in effect. So we can dovetail the private market, the economy, everything that's going on in business world and the regulatory world, and we have to anticipate both. And so, Joel, if you want to maybe talk to us, we can have a conversation sort of both and regulatory and private market.
Right. So, yeah. So let's, if we may, just do a deeper
Yeah.
dive on the labor situation. So, even before COVID, the labor market was tightening. Wages were getting bid up. There was a lot of noise about minimum wage. The federal minimum wage is too low, and there are many markets where it doesn't make any sense. Um, and at the same time, it was getting harder and harder to recruit people, particularly for line level employment. And so you have these double-edged sword, paying more for less productive work, if you will. And so what that has led to is franchises that are evolving their business models to be lower labor models. So how do we do that? We have kiosks for ordering. Think about how you went into a typical QSR 10 years ago and all that counter help was there. Well, it's gone. It's largely gone. And now the newer, prototypes have ordering kiosks, and they, for purposes of the Americans with Disabilities Act, they still have to have somebody who can take an order behind the counter. But between mobile apps and kiosks and drive-throughs, the staffing, the production staffing is about the same, but the service staffing has gone way down. And that is a trend that's going to probably accelerate because minimum wages are going up everywhere. So, there's only so much you can charge for your product. The market dictates that. And as your labor costs push up, your food costs push up, or your costs of goods sold push up, what are you going to do? And so you have some control over labor cost because of the number of people you hire and what you pay them and their productivity. You have less control over supply chain. But again, here's an opportunity for franchisors to help enhance the margins of franchisees and their survivability by having supply chains that are, very effective at reducing the cost of goods. If you ever look at an FDD for a pizza chain, you will see that a big chunk of their revenue comes from making money on supply chain air, inputs for the stores. So they make money on the dough and the sauce and the cheese and the paper goods and everything else. And that model is going to probably need to evolve because as those costs go up, those margins are going to get squeezed.
Mm-hmm.
So, all of that factors into this. And, what AI is going to do for this, who knows? But
Right.
it's coming, and, cost management is going to be a big opportunity for AI and for franchise systems that are able to use AI to help manage cost.
For sure. And I feel like you guys kind of we started off talking about the need to have flexibility, which I think is really interesting, and I also think just oftentimes without counsel in the world of franchising or business running, sometimes people may think, well, I don't want to be flexible. I want to be rigid. This is my idea. This is this is what works. This is what I'm going to do. So having that flexibility, as you're mentioning, being so crucial. But then we gave some real world examples, right? I mean, if having to go back and change the FTD as regards to technology improvements of the kiosks and things like that would be a pain versus just baking it in there originally. Say, hey, there's going to be different technologies. Your cost as a franchisee could be different. This is what it might be looking toward the future. So I think that's all super interesting and incredibly beneficial to anyone who might be thinking about engaging at the ZOR level in particular and kind of getting things off the ground. And along that line, let's talk maybe a little bit about financing. So for a lot of folks that are maybe new to the world of franchising or new to having their own business in some way, they don't factor in how important legal is to the financing side, that they kind of work hand in hand. You don't really know that if you haven't engaged in your own business before. So talk a little bit about just the world of financing for franchise and for franchisees. I mean, I know a lot of them probably go to the SBA. A lot of them, would find ways to try to get financing for what they're doing. But what are we seeing, kind of now, and what are some things counsel wise that folks who are getting into the world of franchising may want to be aware of on the finance side?
Yeah, Trevor, that's a very interesting question because the SBA financing program 7A and 504 have been basically the bedrock of financing small business in the United States, particularly franchises. The SBA has taken away some of its impediments and made it a little bit easier. There was a pretty significant review process that was in place for many, many years by the SBA because what they were afraid of is that franchises were going to be part of a financing scheme for a larger enterprise that didn't qualify for the SBA financing. Well, they realized that was, was a passe idea, and the result was they took away some of the structural impediments to getting SBA financing. But ultimately, until you're balance sheet looks really strong, people who finance should expect that they will need to put in 20 to 25% equity into their business, that they may be able to borrow the rest. If it's SBA, it's probably going to have a lower rate. If it's a conventional financing, it's going to be a market rate with a risk premium, prime plus, if you will. The financing is going to be relatively short term unless you're building a big building like a hotel. Um, you are going to probably need to have some debt service coverage ratios that satisfy the lender. And most importantly, you're going to have a personal guarantee. So you are to build your business, you are putting up your house as collateral.
Mhm.
And once you understand that, then one of the benefits of franchising is, in theory, if it's a solid system, it has a lower failure rate than industries that than other outlets in that industry that are not franchised. But one of the things you can check, and the SBA publishes this data, is the default rates and failure rates. And anybody who's looking at that should check the SBA database to find out. And you can Google it or look on the SBA website to see what the default rate is and what the failure rate is for that either that particular brand or that particular genre of franchise.
Yeah, super. And again, I think that uh, there's several things in there that could be, or several points that you made that may not just be generally known, especially to someone who say, "Oh, I've been talking to a friend of mine who owns five, Smoothie King locations, and they're doing great, and they make all this money, and they love it." And then you think to yourself, "Oh, fantastic! Well, I want to get into franchising too." And then you go to get your loan, and you want to go through SBA, and they say, "Oh, by the way, your house is up for collateral, and you're on the hook." And
That's right.
a lot of times without proper kind of pre-counsel, or maybe someone really understanding on the front end, they wouldn't even, they get blindsided by that.
Right. Well, one of the issues, again, there is a planning opportunity when you own a business that starts to cash flow positively. And the people who tend to be more successful are those that say, you know what, instead of going out and buying that Mercedes, I'm going to pay down this debt.
Hmm.
And so the key is to pay back fast when you're doing this, because then a lender may release you from a guarantee, and all of a sudden your house isn't at risk, and you've got a successful business that maybe for unit number 2 or 3 you can simply what we do call cross collateralize the businesses. So if unit 3 fails, the cash flow from unit 1 and unit 2 will support paying back that debt.
Mm.
And it's and the you got to pay yourself, and you got to plan to pay yourself, which is a big mistake some people make when they do their pro formas that they take to the bank, is they don't consider how much they need to live on and how they need to pay themselves. And so, number one, make sure you get paid enough to sustain the lifestyle you want to lead. And if your franchise plans don't do it, don't accomplish that goal, don't do it. You're not ready. The other way is, there's a very popular financing method of using your 401k balance or borrowing from your 401k to finance your franchise. And there's a structure around that that complies with ERISA. Um, although my friends in that business may not like to hear this, that's a pretty risky proposition, because you're not only risking your current livelihood and your current assets, you're risking your retirement. And so think really carefully before you do that, if that's the way you want to, finance your business. You got to be pretty confident that you have a high probability of success in that circumstance. Every kind of small business fails at some rate, and nobody, it's the old adage of nobody plans to fail, but if you, but if you don't plan, you're more likely to fail.
Hmm.
And so planning around that, and what we call, the British call it ring fencing, but isolating your assets so that if one venture isn't successful, it doesn't take down all of your assets. The more you can do that, the better off you're going to be as a franchisee. And if you're a franchisor, if you want people who are sophisticated enough to understand that to be franchisees, because they're likely to be better franchisees than someone who says, yeah, I'm going to, here I'm all in, I'm putting all my chips on this hand. That's a risky proposition, and you might win, but your chances of getting a pair of twos are just as easy as getting a straight. And so let's think about risk minimization or risk aversion in a business that is prone to high risk.
As an avid gambler who's lost many, many times, I can relate all too sadly to the analogy you just gave. Yes, most of the time, when you take a gamble without really the structure behind it and the plan behind it, you are looking at a strong possibility of failure. I think that's something that just in my experience of knowing franchisees, franchisors, one of the steps that they skip, which anyone listening to this is, I think the point is being driven home very clearly. One of the very first steps you should engage in is getting counsel, and getting counsel via legal for all manners of how you're going to be setting up your business, and how you're going to fundamentally get yourself in a position to succeed right from the beginning. Because ultimately, what a lot of these folks do when they decide, I'm tired of working for somebody else, I'm going to buy into a system, or I've been working at a concept and I've started a concept. Well, now I want to franchise it. Almost always, there's something going on with them where they say, I want to leave something to my family, or I want to build something. I want to build something that is not just mine for the rest of my life, but hey, my adult children can one day run or have. What do those plans look like, for folks? Because you mentioned before, things change. You got to be planning for that, certainly. But some of these businesses, some of these franchise systems, once you got established, they can last 15, 20, 30, 40 years, and be a lineage type of business for their families. How do you counsel folks for kind of setting that structure up to be successful, for them to be able to, in a good way, pass it along to their family members that they were wanting to do?
Laura?
I was going to say franchising, one of the things we tout is builds generational wealth, right? So one of the first things Joel and I ask a potential client who says, I have a business and I want to become a franchisor is, what is your goal? What are you looking to do long term? Do you want this to be an exit strategy where you might sell to private equity in 5 or 10 years? Or is this something that you're pursuing as a wealth building tool for your kids and to build? And our counsel, while some things we will always tell you to do no matter what your goal is, we do try to keep that in mind from day one when we're building your franchise program as an emerging franchisor, to help you reach that goal. And also, again, going back to flexibility, knowing that life changes, life happens, you can change your mind. What can we do to put you in a good position, so that you can reach this goal or change your goal, as a business owner?
So yeah, and building on that, Trevor. So whether it's the ZOR side or the Z side, your structural plan, and most of the time now people use limited liability companies because there's a lot of tax and flexibility benefits to using that form, but you can use any corporate form. But the key is have a well thought out plan for equity ownership, whether you want your key employees to participate in the accretion of equity for that business. How would you plan to either transfer that equity to the next generation or sell it to a third party? And if you're in a business relationship with somebody else, you have to look at what we call the 4 Ds and B. So death, disability, disagreement, bankruptcy, and divorce, and plan for all of those in your LLC operating agreement or your shareholder agreement if you're a corporation. You need to work with a quality accountant who can give you some things that the lawyers maybe can't, because they'll run the numbers. We're not really supposed to act like accountants. um, and decide, should you be a sub S, should you be an LLC. Those are the kinds of questions that accountants can help you answer. And then you have a solid plan for um, building equity, uh, providing liquidity, um, getting working capital, at a relatively modest cost, paying debt, and then when you have the good financial base and the structural base, then all things are possible. If you don't have that, if you don't think it through, if you just kind of make it up on the fly as you go along, you could get hurt, uh, one side or the other. And that would be an important element to any any business. In franchising, it's particularly important because the franchisor has a lot of say in who owns and runs your business. And if you're a franchisor, you want to have a lot of say in who stands behind the counter, or who's answering the phone, or who's knocking on the door when that truck pulls up to a customer's home. And so all of that becomes really critical in creating a relationship where there's trust, where there's knowledge, and where there's a feeling that the franchisee is getting support, and the franchisor is getting the franchisees buy into the programs that it believes will make that franchise successful.
And those things are so important. And the I think one of the biggest themes and kind of takeaways here is, if you have to plan to succeed, but you also have to plan to exit, and you have to plan to change, and all those things are fundamental at the franchisor and franchisee level, for sure. All right. Well, thank you. Is there anything on the horizon, kind of coming up, that you guys are seeing that maybe folks, should be on the lookout for? You mentioned earlier about privacy laws, and that certainly impacts your ability to do advertising to certain people and gather data. I know that firsthand for some franchise systems. Are there any other things coming up, maybe on the legal side and on the horizon, that the franchise world should be on the lookout for?
So the consumer privacy laws keep me up at night, right? I'm going to be honest. It is a changing landscape. It's applicable to franchisors, franchisees. It looks like a lot of states are going to impose burdensome compliance obligations, like cyber audits and risk assessments, and mandatory language, and opt-in, opt-out. There are just a lot of different rules, and of course it varies by state, so there's not really a nice, neat chart, or we can't wrap it up with a bow and tell our clients, oh, this is an easy package. If you do X, Y, and Z, you'll be compliant in these 8 states. That's unfortunately not the case. But franchisors and franchisees collect a lot of personal data of their customers and consumers, and there's, as you said, marketing and advertising, loyalty programs, all these things. So we are counseling our clients to talk to data privacy, to talk to us or their counsel about how to manage this risk. There's potential financial ramifications for noncompliance, and we don't know how to calculate those risks right now. But we want to keep our clients informed of what is happening, what we see coming in the future, and updating their contracts, looking at their service providers, again, not to beat a dead horse, but to be able to be flexible, to include recognition of, global privacy controls, the employee-specific privacy notices, public or consumer-facing privacy notices, and any franchisors that are doing business internationally, of course, have to comply with the EU or the UK GDPR, which is a whole other ball of wax. Um, but we would encourage you to have a conversation with your counsel to make sure you are prepared, because there's just so many laws that are applicable to franchisors and franchisees in this space that you know the other you had talked about advertising and marketing, and this is your world, Trevor. Talking about the campaigns with automated calls and text messages. The TCPA has been around for a while, um, and but sometimes businesses are held vicariously liable for the actions of third parties, with they've contracted with the telemarketing services. And so that's always something that we want to be aware of, as part of marketing or advertising, consulting with Privacy Counsel, making sure your programs align with the compliance program of the TCPA, and again, any state laws where there are advertising and marketing rules. Um,
For
Yeah,
sure.
let me add to that. January 1, a federal law called the Corporate Transparency Act came into effect. And until a business gets to have 5 million in revenue, 20 employees in a location in the US, it's going to apply to every new business in the United States. And as of January 1, 2025, it's going to apply to every existing business in the United States. Franchisors and franchisees need to have a compliance strategy. It is not difficult, but there are a lot of preliminary steps that need to be taken, and people need to be aware of it. And for the first time ever, the federal government, in an effort to combat money laundering and drug trafficking and human trafficking and other societal ills, is coming down hard on small business. And so people need to understand that there's probably going to be a ramp up of enforcement, but the Treasury Department doesn't have a sense of humor. And at some point, people are going to need to really pay attention to the statute and the reporting obligations. Not difficult, but it's very important, because the penalties are big, and so nobody wants to get caught on the penalties. Other trends, we talked about joint employer. Congress is having a vote on tomorrow about a resolution to override the NLRB joint employer rule. Not clear it's going to pass. It'll clearly get vetoed. Um, so not sure where that is going. Um, and then, we had over the last 2 years the implementation of the state policy about the use of what are called closing questionnaires or acknowledgments. And this has been a very esoteric regulatory issue, but it's very important to franchisors, particularly in when you have the use of franchise brokers and you have the use of distributed sales forces where not everybody comes into the home office and dumps their emails into the central depository of the franchisor. If and this has become an area of great consternation in the franchise space, because the franchisees are hated, of course, because they'd like as many bites at the apple if things go bad as possible. And the franchisors want to know, if your salesman told you that you were going to do 2 times our average unit volume in this location, I don't want to sell you a franchise. But I don't know that unless you tell me that, because he's not telling me that. And so, an important check and balance in the system is now pretty limited in the 10 registration states. FTC hasn't made an announcement on that yet. It'll probably be addressed in the FTC rule revision, but well, that remains to be seen. There's a lot of agitation for it. Now, the other future trend I want to make you aware of is there's going to be enhanced disclosure about franchise brokers in FDDs or accompanying FDDs. And so there's a lot of work being done to create that form of broker disclosure. But whenever that revision comes out, I think you will see, significantly more franchise broker disclosure, because brokers have become such an important part of the franchise selling process. So that's my crystal ball for right now.
I think that's a good peek into the future from the almighty Karnak. So we appreciate that. And we it's been so super enlightening to be able to speak to you all. The majority of the folks that we speak to obviously are in the weeds, right? They are the franchisor, they are a multi-unit franchise owner, or whatever, and they're about their vision, they're about their product, they're about moving and shaking, and this is such a great reminder and a great shot in the arm to folks in this world to remember, hey, we all want to succeed. You want to make money. That's why you're doing it. There's steps that have to be taken. There's advice that you need to heed, and things that you need to be paying attention to, and new information that's constantly coming about that you want to be mindful of. So, Joel and Laura, we really appreciate you guys being on here. If you couldn't tell by listening, they are truly experts in the world of franchise law and franchise counsel and advising. So if you need an advisor or we're looking for counsel, go to BakerDonelson.com. Is that right? BakerDonelson.com.
Correct.
There you go. I nailed it. BakerDonelson.com, and you can reach out. And I'm sure Laura would love to speak to you. And then Joel, with his experience as well, could be of a big help. So again, thank you both. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you very much. Great to speak to your audience.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. And Katie, this was a big topic for you. I mean, legal and talking through the details of business ownership, right up your alley.
Right up my alley. I knew I was right on pace with y'all.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we all learned something, and we appreciate you all, and we'll talk to you on the next Franchise or Bust. Thank you.